Hi. The last group of vertebrates we're going to talk about are bipeds. Bi means two, peds mean feet. Bipeds are animals like us that walk on two legs. And of course, the penultimate or the ultimate example of a biped vertebrate is humans. And so, again, we're going to look at it. You need to know, again, the bones associated with it. There's a skull. We have scapula, humerus, radius, ulna, phalanges,
The pelvic girdle.
femurs, tibia, fibia, and phalanges. Again, there's a picture in the back of your lab manual that has all these, and you want to label those and be able to know them on the quiz. It's very possible on the lab exam I will have a picture of our friend here with a red dot on one of those bones and ask you to identify that bone, so you need to be able to know them.
This is probably a good point to emphasize that you really should be able to identify the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeletons and all the other skeletons that we talked about today. So that would be a kind of final check. If you can go back and look at those skeletons, identify the girdles that attach the pectoral limbs as well as the pelvic limbs. So that's important to note.
Right now, I think we want to concentrate on the several adaptations that have occurred in the evolution of humans to allow them to be bipedal. That the structure of the skeleton had to subtly change in some very interesting ways for humans to become bipedal. I think the first adaptation I'm going to talk about is the angle of the head of the femur here versus the long axis of the femur. And if you look at this angle, that is a fairly large angle. It's not 90 degrees. It's much larger than 90 degrees. And that results in the normal position of the femur is so that it points down towards the middle of your body. As I am standing right now, my feet are together and my legs are actually going directly in from my vertebrae. The result is I can pick up one leg and I don't fall over. If instead my legs are at the height of my shoulders and I try to lift up one leg, if I try to lift up one leg, I'm going to fall over. To be a biped, you have to have the weight centered under the center of the skeleton. If you don't have that, you're going to have difficulty because when you pick up one leg, you'll fall over. One of the early adaptations of human vertebrates was they developed the angle of this femur so that their legs placed underneath them. And we can see this in fossil specimens. Some of the early fossils you may have heard of, like Lucy, has her femur like this. Second thing we should probably look at is the shape of the vertebral column.
See that?
And if you look at this vertebral column, it starts down here in the ischium, goes up, goes in a little here at the gut area, goes back out at the in the rib thorax area, goes back in under the neck, and then flexes back a little bit. That skeleton is a little bit S-shaped. And that's probably another adaptation to being bipeds. One of the problems bipeds have is that on top of this vertebral column, you have a stinking skull. And that skull can be heavy. It can weigh 8 pounds or more. Every time I take a step, my skull goes up and down about 2 inches. So if I take a step, my head goes up, up, down. If I do that quickly, and there's no cushioning moving that up, think about taking a bowling ball on a stick and moving it up and down 2 inches. That would be very weird, and you're liable to break the stick you're pushing the bowling ball up and down with. The same would happen of our vertebrae, except for the fact that we have this S-shaped curve that allows it to give a little bit. It acts basically as a shock absorber, so it isn't as much of a blow every time you take a step on the skull. Did I explain that right? Okay. Third adaptation I want to talk about take his skull off, is where the foramen magnum is. The foramen magnum is the hole in the bottom of the skull through which the spinal column enters into the skull and connects to the brain. In quadrupeds, the foramen magnum tends to be towards the back of the skull, somewhere back over here. If you look at this guy, this is the best example I've seen. Let's look at our cat. If we look at our cat, boy, the foramen magnum's way back here at the very back of the skull.
Not underneath.
Not underneath. Now that does several things for the cat. One is normally the cat's vertical, it's on fours, and by having the foramen magnum at the back of the skull, it elevates it so its eyes are pointing forward. If we had the foramen magnum in the back of our skull, our heads would be pointing up and we'd be looking at the sky all the time, which probably isn't the best way to be moving around. Natural selection has favored the movement of the foramen magnum in humans to be directly under the bottom center of the skull, and the result is our eyes are pointing forward and not up. That again is an advantage in moving around and an advantage in being able to observe our environment in our natural settings. What else would we say?
Well, the other thing is, you think about where the weight of this animal is born. And here, basically, the weight of the whole body is resting now on the pelvic girdle, straight down. And so, if you look at compare the pelvic girdle of the cat versus the human, this is much more robust. They're much thicker, much stronger to bear the weight of the whole frame. Talk about the phalanges or not?
Did you talk about the phalanges? Do you want to talk about the phalanges?
Go ahead. So you can mention those if you want to. How they stand.
Okay, down here on the foot, we have phalanges down here, and that's basically the bones that compose the foot. Those, in this case, are relatively long, and that helps again create a steady base for us. If we just had a little thin round peg at the end, it would be much easier to fall over. Instead, we have big, long feet. They get in the way sometimes, but they help manage to keep us there. Do I want to do digigrade? No, plantigrade? Okay, we'll skip digigrade, plantigrade for now.